Hannah really is our generational expert.
I think it's a really helpful tool to understand change. We're always going to have a younger generation, and they are going to be calling for and pushing for changes.
The first year where they were like, oh, I don't have Facebook. And I was like, what?
The number one thing is being open and curious. Every single Gen Xer is going to be just like Jez.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, help us all.
Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hi, I'm Amelia
And I'm Jez Francis, and welcome back to the Being Human podcast, where with special guests we continue to explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in.
Spring has sprung here in the UK, and we've just had a Easter bank holiday weekend. What did you get up to over the long weekend, Jez?
So we had Rebecca's parents to stay with us, which was lovely. My father-in-law is a very keen and capable gardener, and he's very generous both with his knowledge built up over years of experience and also getting his sleeves rolled up and helping. So I was very relieved that the 5 beautiful Japanese maple trees, which he grew from seeds and has given to us over the years, I was relieved that they'd survived the winter.
Very good.
And also survived Henry and Lily kicking footballs around in the back garden again.
That's some resilient plants you've got there.
They are resilient. Bex and I feel we're very much the custodians of these living things, and we've become very attached to them. So, a lovely, long family weekend. What about you, Amelia? What did you get up to?
I had a lovely weekend, actually. Celebrated my birthday with my family on the Thursday just before the long weekend started.
A belated happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. And then on Friday, I did a bit of a bar crawl with all of my friends in celebration of that, which led to a bit of a slower Saturday. But Sunday was much more wholesome. My granny was down from Preston, and the whole Vegting family, plus our partners, headed to one of our family friends' house for a delicious meal and gathering with some of our close friends. So a lovely time to eat lots and lots of fab food and chat about all sorts of different things, which when we're at these family friend meetups, often the question I get asked of various subjects that come up is, you know, what do the young people of today think about this? You know,
the voice of youth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which actually got me thinking a little bit about the theme for our podcast today.
Yeah, that is interesting. So family occasions are where you tend to get different generations coming together. And you're right, we can, if we choose to, we can all learn a lot from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. The learning definitely goes both ways. What generation would you say you're a part of?
So I think I'm Gen X. What about you?
I'm not 100% sure because I'm right on the edge of being a millennial or a Gen Z, but I think that's something we can probably unpack with our guest today.
Yes, it's time to welcome Hannah Ubl, our amazing guest this month. Hannah is a co-founder of Good Company Consulting, an organisation dedicated to helping people create authentic and empowering workplaces. Before starting her own company, Hannah worked for an organisation which applied generational insights to recruiting, retention, engagement and marketing challenges. Along with her friend and business partner, Lisa Walden, she's co-written the amazing books Managing Millennials and The Future of Work is Human. So Hannah really is our generational expert. Hannah, welcome to the Being Human podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Hannah, we usually kick off all of our conversations with a couple of different questions to get to know you as a person a little bit better before we'll dive into the subject for today.
Of course. I'm excited for these questions.
Very good.
If you could swap lives with someone for a week, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Okay, so I think I would swap lives with my grandmother when she was in her early 20s. And there are a few reasons for it. Like, I want to say something so much cooler than that and choose some like amazing historical figure. Like, I for sure would like to walk around ancient Greece with a bubble around me so I don't get sick. But like, if I'm going to be real with this question and swapping lives, it would be my grandma because she's no longer living. She passed away about 4 years ago. And there's parts of that time in her life that I don't know about. And she was also so cool. Like, she was doing so much stuff. She was hitting the town and she was in nursing school. And then she was like managing all these things with her family. And also my house that I'm in right now, she grew up 2 blocks away. So it'd also be an opportunity to see like, oh, what was this neighborhood like when my grandmother was growing up? And like, what were her parents like who I never got to meet? And so there's just, I would love to swap life with my grandma.
Love that.
What is a dream or aspiration you've always had but have not yet pursued?
That list is very long, Jez. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, that list is very long. And I mean, there are so many things, like there's so many micro adventures that I would like to go on and places that I'd like to see. One thing in particular, I would really love to become some sort of expert in herbalism. So using any kind of herbs as medicine. And I've always been interested in it, but I'm also the kind of person who will go to a few classes, think it's super, super cool, and then just stop. So the joke in the house is that I have books of all of my interests that I was very fixated on at different moments in my life. And herbalism is one of them. So I have like a stack of books in my house, probably, I don't know, 7, 8 books high about herbs and herbs in the Midwest where I live and like what you can eat and how you can forage. Now, have I foraged those herbs? No, I have not. So it's definitely an aspiration to become more of an expert in it just because I find it really fascinating.
What's the most memorable concert or live performance you've ever attended?
Okay. Well, if we're saying most memorable, I mean, the one that I have the most snapshots in my brain for all time is my very first concert I ever went to. And generationally speaking, so I was a Backstreet Boys fan, and Backstreet Boys was my first concert, and it was the Millennium Tour, which I don't know if either of you remember the aesthetics of the time, but I mean, Y2K fashion is coming back in, so it looks kind of similar, but they all came in and they were suspended from like the rafters in the stadium. And I was in this seat where Nick Carter just kind of swooped right by me. And I as 10-year-old Hannah, basically blacked out. Like, it was the time of my life. I was there with my best friend and her grandpa, who probably didn't really want to be there. And I remember all of it. I remember the fans. I remember the things they threw on stage. Like, it was definitely the most memorable concert of all time. It was amazing.
That sounds fab.
Getting into the topic, just to set the scene, could you give us a quick sense of the sort of work you do and how generations became a topic of interest for you?
Yes. I have to go back a little bit. So right now, as you said in the introduction, a huge part of the work that myself and my business partner, Lisa, do is we work to create better workplaces. That's our huge goal. And this all started about 10 years ago. And I was hired at a generational consulting firm. And their whole thing was about to teach people about that really pesky, annoying young generation called millennials. And at the time, I was one of those young people. And so I was looking for a job. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And they said, "Hey, are you interested in human beings? And do you want to talk about them?" And I was like, "Cool, dream job. This is fantastic." So I was 24, didn't really know what I was doing. It was a job. It was cool. And over time, I really, really fell in love with the topic. I didn't know much about it, to be really candid with you, when I started at this company. And what I learned in all of the work of doing that was so much about human behavior at work. And many times it shows up through a generational lens, not always. And we'll get into that in this conversation. But it was a really huge piece for me to understand myself better, my own generation, when I'm going and talking to executives and leaders and organizations about what 25-year-olds want from work. So that was a really huge, huge piece of just kind of going. I was teaching, I was learning throughout that whole process. And over time, throughout all of that work, of course, I moved up in the company and did a lot of different things, and ultimately left that organization, started my own, with the sole purpose of how can we make sure more people at work have better work experiences. And because generational sociology is such a huge part of my background, that will always filter into what I'm doing now. And I still find it really fascinating. I think it's a really cool lens with which to understand other people, and also to have some really fun conversations as well.
Could you define the term generation for us, or generations?
So generations, I would say it's the sociological science of breaking down populations of people by what shaped them in their formative years to better understand differences and similarities and collective attitudes, behaviors, and values. It's definitely breaking down a population of people based on birth year, and the birth years are determined by what you experienced growing up, because the whole nature of generational theory is that values and behaviors and attitudes of a generation are shaped by what happened when they were growing up. So things like what was happening in politics, what was happening in pop culture. Did you go to Backstreet Boys concerts or did you go to Rolling Stones concerts, right? Like simple little things like that. But when there's shared collective experiences, we tend to have those shared behaviors and attitudes. And my area of study, of course, is all about how that shows up at work. It's less than how it shows up in life. But work and life tend to have some similarities at times as well. So it's definitely there. And then one caveat I do want to say before we kind of dive further into the conversation is that generational theory is a sociological science. So it's studying trends. There are so many nuances that, it's hard to dig into when you're talking about patterns and trends. And they're all really, really important to, the human identity, the human experience. So this is very much a lens and not a box, putting people into a box.
What do you think some of the benefits of referring to society or thinking about society through generational lenses are?
I think it's a really helpful tool to understand change. That's my biggest why behind studying and talking about this topic, because as humans, change is really difficult in general, like lots and lots of change. And no matter what, we're always going to have a younger generation come onto the scene, and they are going to be calling for and pushing for changes. And that can be really difficult for other people. And so I think there's benefit in understanding the generational nuance behind big trends and changes that are happening. And I think even so, like right now, there's the whole movement of quiet quitting, or, people don't care about work in the same way they did before. They're not loyal to institutions. Like there's all these kind of headlines that you can see very easily in publications, or I hear a lot of the exact same thing from leaders and executives. And I think it's always helpful to say, well, let's just take a second and understand why this is happening. Like, let's really take a look at what's happening in the world for this group of people right now and how that's impacting them and their choices. So I think it's helpful in that sense to study generations. But of course, a downfall of it is that people can put them into boxes. I think it's easy when you're like, oh, I have a generational understanding. Therefore, I think every single Gen Xer is going to be just like Jez, and they're going to think the exact same way that you do, right? Like,
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, help us all.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think that's just kind of that definitely is a downfall, I would say. Or if, we walk around holding these like misconceptions about generations that are not true, and then we believe them, and then we perpetuate behaviors because of that misconceptions.
If you could just outline for us the different generations that exist today and, what are the characteristics of those and the life events associated with each one of those generations?
Yes, I would love to go through this. Also, if you two are both open to it, I would love to turn this into an exercise of you understanding your own generation too, if you're both open to it.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I will go through the generations and I will explain birth year, their current age. So, and also another really big caveat, I grew up in the United States. I live in the United States. This topic is very hot here, has been for a long time. In a global perspective, that research is not as profound and broad and everything as it is in the United States. And my work primarily too has been more in the US, Western Europe. And so these will be pretty different. So the silent generation, they were born between about 1926 and 1945. When we say 5 generations, this is the most mature generation right now. And they're known to be pretty loyal to people, to companies. They also are known for being very wonderful at developing relationships. Like they just have a knack for getting to know people, wanting to know them, because arguably technology wasn't their tool for connection. So their tool for connection was conversation and getting to know people and sharing stories. So that's kind of something you'll see with them. Baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964. So they're about 60 to 78 years old right now. And this group, I would say one of the biggest truths globally for this generation is they're huge. Like there are so many baby boomers. It is why they have the name baby boomers. And when you grow up with a lot of peers, you learn to compete at a really young age. Like if you want to be seen, if you want to be heard, if you want to achieve any goals that you might have, you need to stand out a little bit. You need to do better than other people in some capacity. So this group is typically known for having a really good work ethic, and they're the kind of generation too who's kind of, it's like, well, you just say yes and then you figure out how to make it happen. There's a little bit less pushback with this group. So that's something with boomers. Now, Gen Xers, born between 65 and 79, so 45 to 59 years old. Jez, this is your generation. So I'm going to turn this now to you and ask, like, so if you think about what impacted you growing up, okay, if you want to be the extra credit student who, gets more points for your work, you can think about how it ties what you experienced growing up, how it ties to work. But for now, just like, what do you remember?
So I remember entrepreneurialism, people being encouraged to take risks, and in the arts as well. 80s pop music was new, was different, was quite bold, was striking. Technology was just beginning to play its part. Computers at home, like foreign travel became more accessible to more people. Mm-hmm. It felt like everyone sort of, certainly I'm talking about my experience of growing up in the UK, that the gap between the haves and the have-nots shrank. So people had more disposable income to do things. I think I'm remembering it like that. Is that consistent with the definition? Probably not. This is where I feel like I failed.
You're a unique
Jez, you failed
Jez.
again.
Yeah. No, I think that is very fitting. I'm curious. You mentioned 80s pop. So music comes up all the time with Generation Xers. So of course, I am very curious. Who was your pop icon?
So Depeche Mode were and still are my heroes. That kind of electronic post-punk alternative music, merging into some kind of more kind of guitar-based rock as we got into the 90s as well. Mm-hmm. I really started to identify with bands and particular trends in the 80s, in the mid-80s going onwards. And then I hit university and the grunge thing exploded and it was just heaven for me. I remember seeing some fantastic bands coming over from Seattle in the UK, and not many of the lead singers of which are still around, unfortunately. But
right.
Yeah, music was a very big part of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it is for every generation, and it usually symbolizes a reaction to the times. I think that's why pop culture is so cool, is you can study it and how it's reflective of human behavior and how people are feeling in that moment. And grunge is a good example of that. Like the Generation Xers, especially in the West, were known for being a little like, I want to, push back. Like they were known as the really apathetic generation, but really they were just skeptical. They were questioning. And I don't know if you relate to this, Jez, but Gen Xers questioned a lot more than generations before. And part of it was, with globalization really expanding to a lot of places, there was more information about what was happening in the world, more information about how things could look different and how it could be different than what your parents thought it could be or should be. And so Gen Xers were kind of like, we can do this differently.
I think the world started to feel like a smaller place. And with the emerging kind of technology as well, I remember the first couple of years at work when the internet arrived proper and email arrived proper. And all of a sudden, our horizons suddenly pushed back a long, long, long way. We were able to see things in a much broader, more holistic sense. And as you say, many more things were possible. And we also enjoyed, from an economy point of view, we enjoyed a boom that meant that not only were these things visible, but they were also accessible as well in many ways.
Well, and even tied to the entrepreneurialism piece. So there's a sense with a lot of Gen Xers of, I can do it myself. I've got it. I can handle it. And the joke is usually with generational theory and Gen Xers is that at work, Gen X is typically the one that's like, just tell me what you want and when you want it. Okay, I'll get it done. Don't worry. Like if I have questions, I will come to you. But otherwise, just let me do my thing. I'll talk to you later. And that's pretty different than, say, the millennial generation who wants to like ask questions and collaborate a little bit more in the meantime. But Gen Xers are just so comfortable on their own. They're like, I'm good. You want to do something right, do it yourself. Like that's just kind of, that can be a mindset of Gen Xers. I'm not saying this is you, Jez, but it could be. Who knows?
I'm incredibly needy of everyone's time. All the time.
You're needy. I love it. Well, that was a really good description, I feel like, of Gen X. A lot of what you talked about, like the world getting smaller, technological advances, making things more possible, getting more information. And the other thing too with Gen Xers is they very much, I talked about like the work ethic of boomers, and Gen Xers are pretty much, let's just work smarter, not harder. Like, how can we get what we need to get done and then be done and then go enjoy life? So that's very much a mindset of a lot of Gen Xers as well. Okay, millennials. I mean, I'm a millennial and kind of like right smack dab in the middle of it. And one of the big things for millennials was rapid technological change, especially if you think about phones. And I say this because if you think about how just naturally we all use our phones for everything in life all the time now, how much we use internet for everything all the time, that wasn't the case before. And so millennials were growing up in the movement of, oh, we have dial-up internet and it's slow and it's, oh, this is so hard. I just want to log on and have a chat with my friends. And then we have these phones that are evolving so quickly, so fast. And then we have more access to information, to people. And essentially what that means is a lot of millennials expect rapid change. They're like, if it's not happening, I'm going to make sure that it does happen. And constant innovation and constant change is a really, really good thing. So if you think about when millennials first went into work, a lot of people labeled them as entitled. And usually it's because they said, but I think we could do this in a better, faster way. And that sounded very entitled. And really because a lot of millennials were just so accustomed to that change. So let's keep changing. Let's go into Gen Z. And Amelia, now you can kind of like share some things between the two groups. So born between 96, 2010, between 14 to 28 years old. So really kind of an interesting age group life stage wise right now. So I'm curious, Amelia, like for you growing up as one of these people on the cusp between two generations, what do you remember as something formative for you?
I think technology is one of the things that does get spoken about quite a lot, especially now with younger generations. But what I think was the big difference for me is I didn't grow up with access to loads of social media really young. So if I got my first mobile phone, I think the first year that I went to secondary school. So that was 2008. But that was a phone which we were still Bluetooth transferring music from one another. Like Spotify wasn't a thing. There wasn't super instant access to absolutely everything. But obviously we could still text our friends with stupid messages trying to use the fewest letters in order to not have your phone bill go absolutely like off the scale. But then there was that shift, which I think was when I was in my later years at school, where suddenly everybody got like Blackberries and BBM was a thing and everyone got their Facebook accounts and suddenly you were posting everything. And that was a huge part of what our lives were all about. And then there was the shift sort of into, the iPhone and what social media is now. So I think looking back on that changes of technology growing, I think is a big part. Whereas I know for other members of late Gen Zers that all of that I experienced later would have been with them very early on. I've always been encouraged to do what I enjoy as opposed to do this subject because it will get you this degree and you can go and do this job that's very well paid. That was something that I think was quite common amongst me and my friends, which was, what are the subjects you enjoy, do what you're passionate about. The sort of access to information and opportunities has always been there. I mean, might be sort of a privileged place that I come from, but I've been to a lot of places and done a lot of things. I had the opportunity to take a year out, and that was encouraged to go and explore the world and see that as a benefit to building you as a character rather than thinking, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, that's interesting. Social media is something that will come up of, oh, when did you get fill in the blank, this social media tool? And how do you use it now versus how did you use it then? And I think that that's kind of part of the conversation around it. I mean, if you think now, do you still use social media, Amelia? Are you like, oh, I love going on Instagram? And
Instagram is definitely the one that I use, but it's really interesting you say that because when I was at university, I was part of the hockey club. And I was on the committee, so we were sort of helping organising, passing all the messages around. And we used Facebook to do that because it was the easiest way to communicate with everyone. And in the 3 years that I was at university for, we were then at the fair as girls were coming up to sign up, and they were like, oh, how do I find out about trials, or how do I find out about the first social? And we were like, oh, just join the Facebook page. And it was the first year where they were like, oh, I don't have Facebook. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean you don't have Facebook? Like, surely everyone's got a Facebook account. And they were like, no. We were like, God, okay, we're going to have to work out a new way to get this information to them. But for us, it was not that I used Facebook in the same way that I did 10 years ago, or, you know, even 5 years ago, but I still had the account and still would happily use that to get a load of information from something else.
We talked about that like technological change for millennials, and a lot of that was in the actual physical tools that we were using. And for Gen Z, it's like, no, we have the tools, like we've got them, and they're slowly shifting and changing. It's more about what are the platforms that we're using on those tools, and how does that shape the way we communicate, the way we learn, the way we interact, the way we speak up for change in the world, which is a huge thing that Gen Z is doing because they have that tool to do so in a way unlike others before. And to even back to, you know, Jez talking about like Gen Xers and globalization, there was more access to information. And now, I mean, you can learn so much so quickly about anything, anywhere, at any time. And something about this group that I think is a little bit unique is I feel like they have had to grow up so exponentially fast in ways that other generations can't as much comprehend, like living through a global pandemic and how that impacted you at really monumental moments of your life. Like if you think about when you are a teenager, when you're in your early 20s, we have these really big moments that we experience, and they experience them in drastically different ways, depending on where they lived and what they were going through. So it's a group that has had to grow up pretty fast.
My two children are Gen Z. Is that right? Am I saying it right? Yeah, Gen Z.
Classic Gen X, that is.
Yeah. But one of the things I have noticed is that I think they are vastly more creative than I am in terms of their thinking. They're definitely more activist. They believe in things and stand for it. I think they're quite skeptical about the truth. And so where we would spend hours, I say we would spend hours, we were supposed to spend hours in the library researching work and our studies and what have you, and finding sources of information and sort of comparing and contrasting. And I think there was a trust in facts as they were presented to us in perhaps a way that doesn't exist, or is they have a different relationship with information and how to validate it. And there's much more, seemingly, I think there's much more kind of peer-to-peer validation of the truth. And how do I feel about this fact as it's being presented to me, rather than kind of individual to expert kind of validation, because I'm not sure that they necessarily trust the experts in the way that perhaps we did growing up. It is fascinating, isn't it, how when you were born and the shared experiences of politics, of technology, of society, of what people believe in, ideologies and so on and so forth, how that shapes how you interact with the world and the people around you. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. It's a fascinating study of even, you know, your kids' lived experiences, to have that conversation with other people around their own age, or to have a conversation with Amelia, who's closer in age to them than myself or you, Jez. Like just kind of to hear all those nuances and difference is amazing. Yeah, there's a shift, which is making, I feel like other generations have to think a lot harder about how they communicate or what they believe. And some people in the face of that are irritated or annoyed, and other people are inviting it as an opportunity to rethink, which I feel like is part of the generational topic in general.
I am fascinated by the point you made about comfort with change and the pace of change. And there's no two ways about it. You know, things that are happening in society and then culturally, it feels like the cycle of things is quicker, and that younger generations, because they've grown up with that and have not known anything other than that, seem more comfortable with it. It must be exasperating being someone that is comfortable with the pace of change and having to work in an environment or be part of an environment where that things happen. You know, it's the difference between snow falling off a roof and glacial creep.
We now have a generational workforce. Jez mentioned 5 generations who exist in the workforce. So what are the main challenges for organizations in that context?
Yes, I think there are a few. I don't think all of them are purely generational. And one of the big things I think that we are seeing right now, and this is a very, I feel like, hot topic of the moment thing that might shift 5 months from now, I don't know. The return to office conversation has been fascinating to watch, to see. It is still a hot topic of conversation where and what we're seeing a lot of right now, and this I do believe is somewhat generational, is that there were these leaders of organizations, of companies who had grown into their places of success, learned what it was like to be successful, to lead a successful organization. And that was mostly in an office, mostly, not entirely, mostly. And if it was, people working in different parts of the world, we at least had a headquarters, we had a home base where people would be. And oftentimes that leader would be at the home base. And so to think that you can create a workplace environment, a good culture for people, not primarily in an office environment, even though it was successfully done over the years, the pandemic years, if you will, then they got to a place where they're like, but that still is the only way to really have an effective working environment. We have to go back to the office. And we've seen so much of a pushback from people who are doing the work to the return to office mandates. And so that's something that's been really generational that we've been watching, because pretty much for the most part, younger generations are like, look, it's not that I don't want to see people. That's a misconception, that you think I just want to be at home with my technology all the time and never have to interact with human beings. Like, that's not true. I just want the flexibility and the autonomy to create my own schedule and to do my own thing and to be trusted in the work that I'm doing. So I think that's a big piece that we're seeing as far as a generational challenge. And on top of that, I would say something that is happening right now, there's always communication challenges. There's learning differences when it comes into a work environment. And I think that that's something that we're seeing. So I'll give you an example of this. This is something we hear about a lot. And it's, in the past generations, it was sort of this like jump how high sort of work environment. Like, you get in, you figure it out, you do your work and it's fine and it's good. Okay, you just like figure it out. Here's the goal, do it. With the youngest generation right now, this group that has grown up with so much technological access to information, to processes, to systems, to how to do things, if they show up at work and they're told, here's what I need you to do, go do it, they will not feel empowered to do their work, because they will say, wait, what are the steps? Like, what do you need me to do? What is the system you want me to follow? What are your actual clear expectations of me? Because if I don't get that clarity and expectation, but I don't understand why I would do this work in the way you want me to do it. So I feel like even just understanding that nuance is a massive generational challenge currently at work.
What I think is really interesting about the return back to the office conversation is that I think that sometimes there can be a lack of sometimes empathy towards understanding what younger people having experiences which form your social connections with people, the way that you learn, suddenly all going to being online, and then you start a new role, then all of a sudden, and that's what you're used to as how you sort of shaped into like an early adult, really. And then that sudden rush to go, you need to come back to the office because this, and this, when you're not used to that, but equally probably not ever having experienced the benefit of working with people in the same environments all of the time, that they're just, sometimes I think from both sides, it's a conversation about understanding what are the benefits of both and then coming to that mutual agreement, because it's a brilliant thing to be able to sit and chat in an office with somebody who's doing a totally different role to you and you going, oh my God, that's actually really interesting. Why don't I give that a go? But unless you're next to that person, you're not going to randomly call them on Teams unless that's part of your company culture or whatever ways that people are trying to bridge that gap. But I think sometimes there's more conversation that needs to be had to sort of empathise with each individual as to why they want that return to work or why they don't.
I'm curious. I think probably we're generations in the workplace are much more aligned than we think we are at times. And actually some of the underlying things that are important to everyone can unite us. You know, people want to be paid fairly. They want to be led by inspiring, caring, kind leaders. They want a degree of flexibility and autonomy. People want to grow. They want to feel at the end of a given working year that they've somehow developed and stretched and learned new stuff. And I think people want to feel like they fit in and they want to be able to, they don't want to be fearful of work or feel, the Sunday night scaries. I think, is that an expression that you've...
Yes.
I've stolen from you, haven't I, Hannah? I think that exists for lots of different generations. So My suspicion is that the way forward with this kind of stuff is through dialogue and conversation and trying to understand the nuanced needs of people in different generations versus the kind of, at times, almost like the way in which kind of, the differences in people in terms of people's desires and expectations of work are kind of presented in a very polarized fashion. I'm not sure necessarily that that's 100% the case. That I think is fascinating and eternally interesting. The other thing I was going to say, regardless of which generation you're part of, there are periods in your life that are common as well. So whether you're Gen Z, Millennial or Gen X, at some point you started work. And then you started having relationships and in some cases having families or having other people that became important to you in your life and that needed your time. Some of us then get to a stage where we have kind of parents that need looking after and what have you. And so not only are we born in a generation and that generation kind of goes through life experiencing things, but we also have common experiences regardless of when we were born as well that can connect us.
Yes, I agree. And I think that life stage component, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's fascinating, honestly, to look at what people have written about generations throughout time. And even just the phrase, young people don't want to work anymore. There are headlines going back to the 1890s of people saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's something that I think the life stage component is so absolutely real. And typically younger generations, they want to make a big difference. They're hungry for learning and for growth when they are just starting in their careers. And that's something that has been written about every generation since it became a hot topic when they got into the workplace. So I think it's just that life stage will look a little bit different for every generation. And we all experience them in some way or another.
What have you seen as successful stories of when managers and leaders have got those conversations right?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the number one thing, and Amelia, you were alluding to this earlier, is being open and curious. That's how to lead a really good conversation around generational differences, is to lead with curiosity. It's really easy into the conversation of change to get to a place where we can get emotional without thinking that we're being emotional. Someone described it to me as you can react with the 3 Ds. So you deflect, you deny, or you defend. And if you instinctually will go to this place when you're thinking about, generational differences or what have you, it's like that actually is not as useful if we're open to curiosity and understanding. I think that's one of the most important things. And within that, I feel like it's kind of an umbrella, and then underneath in practice, that looks like providing multiple avenues for opportunity, for growth, for even something like rewards. Like one thing I know that people have done is like, oh, I'd like to reward you. Do you prefer this or this for a reward? And then sometimes there's generational trends as far as what people prefer, as far as even rewards and recognition. So it's like just being open to first understanding differences and then providing different kinds of paths for people, different kinds of recognition for people, because we're all unique individual human beings. So I think that's one of the best things we can do. I mean, that's the power too of cross mentorship, is to ask each other questions and try to understand things from different perspectives. Because we need to always, it's my belief that we have to do the work to meet in the middle. It's not that, boomers and Xers need to do everything to understand millennials and Gen Z. It's like we have to be doing the work to understand each other. Because that's when, true connection happens, and respect, and all of the things that we really want from, I feel like, our interactions in life and work. That's when that happens. So I'm curious, might be a little too sentimental, but you two are different generations. So I think too, something that's helpful is like, what have you learned from each other?
I now know who Alan Partridge is.
Alan Partridge is a comedy character from the world of TV and radio and books that I've grown up with, that poor Amelia has had to...
No, I'm only joking. I'll give a serious response. What I've learned from Jez is when, Just Add Water was one of the first companies that I've joined, and you've shown me all of the ways of how to do the programs and the creative exercises that we do, and the thought that goes into making those experiences happen for our clients, and why we go about doing that, so that then when we're thinking now about who's the next client, the sort of methodology, how you came up with that for somebody else, I can now apply to what I would do for a different group of people. But that's a whole set of stuff I had no idea about until we started working together. So thank you.
So Amelia has a drive and I don't know whether it's comfort with change, but, she will always approach something that is kind of, there is probably a better way of doing this. Let's work out together what that is, which I think is fantastic. It's fun working with someone who's much closer to the age of my children. In a fabulous way, you've helped me understand the way their minds work as well, which is really good. The other thing I've really enjoyed, and this is going to sound if it sounds patronising, it's not meant to at all. There's a great line in Star Wars or one of those movies that talks about, once you were the master, but now I'm in control or something like that. I definitely feel like there's been a shift, and that there was a time when you could learn things from me.
There still is.
And now I feel it's completely the other way around, and I'm trying desperately to hold on.
I love that. Thanks for sharing with each other. It's fun for me to listen. And Jez, I love that you used the most classic Gen X reference of Star Wars as like...
I can't help myself. Hannah, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak to us. We're very, very grateful. It's been hugely insightful and informative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
So, Amelia, what did you think?
My reflection from our conversation with Hannah is that I think we've been able, as the three of us, to sit and explore the similarities and differences between us all, in this case based on, our different generational labels. But the more conversations as society that we can have like this, exploring what makes us unique as individuals and therefore your collective group of people, of peers around you, but actually what makes you similar across the board of us all being human beings, the better. There can be no bad thing that comes from trying to increase your understanding of more perspectives and worldviews that are out there. One thing I do think is that it would be really interesting to continue this conversation with different audiences of people from different cultures around the world. We had a very UK-US conversation, as Hannah also pointed out, and I think to continue that conversation and explore what might be similar and different based on their experiences of growing up and their formative years from different locations around the world would be really interesting. But I do feel like we could have sat and chatted about that for a really, really long time. So what did you think about that, Jez?
Well, similar to you, the thing that really struck me listening to Hannah is how each generation has a tendency to think about everything through the generational lens that they're familiar with, that they've grown up with. And that brings a lot of baggage, but it's completely understandable as well. But also that we have it within our gift to challenge some of that. How much we can learn from taking time to see and experience life and work and everything in between through others born in different generations by simply talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really brilliant conversation. And but just before we sign off, I think you might have a boring story to tell the listeners.
When people see me, they tend to turn away because I'm boring.
That fabulous part of the podcast where we celebrate the ordinary, down-to-earth and downright dull moments that make up a significant proportion of what it means to be human. Okay, haircuts. How about that?
Go for it.
We all have them, right? I have found a barber near us who's cut my hair for what I've always considered to be a sensible amount of money for a haircut, £10.
Oh, bargain.
Last week, for one reason or another, which I won't bore you with, I meant to get my haircut at the usual place, but I didn't. So I ended up going to a barber's in London near the office. I didn't ask how much a haircut was. I just walked in and sat down.
Uh-oh.
Haircut done. A bit long on top, perhaps. Slightly different style. But, I'm not one to moan. I went to pay almost 40 quid.
Oh, gosh. You should have asked before you sat down.
I know. I almost fell over. So I had a haircut that I wasn't particularly happy with for almost 4 times.
You weren't tempted at that moment to go, actually, could we just take a bit more off to get your money's worth?
I felt like I had to get out of there. What about you, Amelia? Let us in on an ordinary event in your life.
Well, Jez, today I'm actually venturing into what's usually your territory on boring things about me.
It's got to be bins.
It's bins. Well done, well done. So it was bin day this morning, which means they've obviously got to go out. So there I am in the kitchen emptying the bin, which we've got to the point where we'd let it get a little bit too full. So you've heaved up what you can of the bin and pulling as it's sort of in this vacuum. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Really difficult to get out. All my strength, I'm pulling it up, and eventually it pops out of the top. In doing so, bin juice falls all over my leg and splashed onto my top. So I had to do an entire outfit change. Didn't have time to actually put it in the washing machine on a quick wash. So that's going to be disgusting when I get home later. But yes, note to self, leave a little bit more time when doing the bins before going to work, just in case there's a bit of a bin juice saga. Thanks so much for listening to the Being Human podcast. Please do hit the follow button and leave us a review on whatever platform you're using.
If you've got suggestions on topics you'd like us to talk about, or if you think you'd make a brilliant guest, or if you'd like to know a little bit more about what we do at Just Add Water, then please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
Okay, hello, it's Jez and Amelia. Amelia?
Good start.
Yeah, let's get these out of the way now. Wonderful world we find ourselves living in. From the important... Sorry. I'm waiting for you and you're waiting for me.
Yes.
And that equals silence.
Yeah, it does.
Which is what we call a podcast hole.